Welcome. I'm Tracy Smith, and this is Here Comes the Sun, a closer look at some of the people, places, and things we bring you every weekend on Sunday morning. Katy Tur reports the news each day on MSNBC. She calls it a business where you're not supposed to lie. But she says she took that to heart when she wrote her latest book about a thrilling and sometimes tumultuous upbringing with her high-flying parents. Growing up, how did you see your mom and dad?
When I was a kid, they were the coolest people in the world. We had a helicopter. I got to go up in a helicopter. I knew how to fly a helicopter. It was a really unique and interesting childhood that nobody else had. Good to be with you. I'm Katy Tur.
You might know Katy Tur as an MSNBC anchor or as a mother of two, married to our own Tony DeCopel.
How do you get Mexico to pay for that wall?
Only if I'm president.
How does that happen?
And you might recall her locking horns with then presidential candidate Donald Trump on the campaign trail.
Puff the magic dragon.
But in the 1980s, Katy was just a cute little kid with a seat on the wildest ride in town.
More from my talk with Katy Tur coming up a little later in the show. As a kid, watching this, growing up in the midst of this, what was that like?
Tumultuous. We would go out to lunch or to dinner, and you'd learn to eat really fast because at any moment the scanner would come to life and there would be a story, and you'd have to leave midway through the meal. So I learned to just shovel food into my mouth and be quick about it.
Was everything in your life in those early years about the next story, about getting to the next story?
It all revolved around it. I think some of my first words were smoke showing.
Then Rita Braver with the Art of Joan Mitchell.
Her work is strong, muscular, declarative, aggressive. It is everything that abstract expressionism thought that it wanted to be.
She was one of several important women artists who exhibited at that time. Yet it seems like it was the men who got all the attention. Why was that?
Well, it's not rocket science to figure out why. It was just plain old sexism.
Still, Joan Mitchell always charted her own course.
In France, I'm an American gestural painter, which is and lyric on top of it, very pejorative. And here I'm Frenchy because I have color and then decorative. Ooh, so you can't win, honey. And on top of it all, I'm a girl, woman, female.
That's all coming up right here on Here Comes the Sun. Katy Tur is certainly a force to be reckoned with. She anchors a show each day on MSNBC, tangled with Donald Trump on the campaign trail, and is the mother of two young kids at home. Where'd all that tenacity come from? I met up with her to find out.
If you want to see everything in Los Angeles, you can't beat the view from a helicopter.
I'm Bob Tur. I'm a helicopter pilot and reporter and have been for the past 20 years here in the City of Angels.
And for much of the 80s and 90s, news chopper pilot Bob Tur and wife Marika Gerard saw it all. On any given story, Bob, who then flew for local CBS stations, would typically be first over the scene, and Marika would lean out the open door with her camera to capture the story, and at times, history. There were the '92 LA riots, the O.J. Simpson car chase.
It would appear that the Bronco will continue north on the 405 freeway.
And more catastrophes than you can count. Great picture. They started the Los Angeles News Service.
I'm gonna get you.
And when they started a family, Katie here and later James, they brought him up in the sky.
Growing up, how did you see your mom and dad?
When I was a kid, they were the coolest people in the world. We had a helicopter. I got to go up in a helicopter. I knew how to fly a helicopter. It was a really unique and interesting childhood that nobody else had. Good to be with you. I'm Katy Tur.
You might know Katy Tur as an MSNBC anchor or as a mother of two, married to our own Tony DeCopel.
How do you get Mexico to pay for that wall?
Only if I'm president.
How does that happen?
And you might recall her locking horns with then presidential candidate Donald Trump on the campaign trail.
Puff the magic dragon.
But in the 1980s, Katy was just a cute little kid with a seat on the wildest ride in town.
Here they are.
In the documentary Whirlybird, you can hear her describing a crash scene.
What do you see?
I see some people in yellow coats. I think they're firefighters.
The images were wild, and I was in a front row seat for it. Literally in the helicopter, feeling the flames on my shins.
You could feel it.
You could feel it.
That close.
Oh, yeah.
And how old were you?
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Wow. Yeah.
In her latest book, Rough Draft, from an imprint of Simon & Schuster, a division of CBS's parent company, Katy Tur describes her parents as broadcast pioneers who often put themselves in harm's way. Katie's mom, Marika.
I know, and now that I think about it, I think this is ridiculous that the both of us were up in the air doing this dangerous stuff, and we have 2 kids. You know, what's going to happen if something happens to both of us?
But at the time...
Yeah, it was too much excitement, too much fun. It really was. It was exciting and it was fun.
But the fun was often fleeting. Katy Tur says her dad could be demanding, abusive, and at times violent.
He would come home in these fits of anger. Something would set him off, and he would get so out of control that he would throw his fist through a wall. And it happened often. I mean, we would go to the store, buy plaster them up. I remember him throwing batteries at my mother. The violence was always there. It felt like it was normal, like that was just how a relationship worked. You got angry, you got violent, you yelled and you screamed, and then everything was fine.
But over time, she says, the situation got worse.
And the reason we didn't call the cops was because Bob Tur's name in a police blotter means Bob Tur can't make any more money, and oh my God, we need to buy groceries.
Right, but you know, that's why it kept going. And that's why it always keeps going.
Yeah.
Because there's always somebody who forgives the person or hides it or puts it under the, and who actually benefits from that? Nobody.
My point is, it's not your fault. It's Dad's fault.
There's a lot of fault to go around.
Here we go. We took Katy Tur on her first helicopter ride in more than 20 years. Some things, like the feel of a chopper in flight, never change.
How amazing is this? Who gets to grow up like this? Nobody.
And some change has been dramatic. In 2013, her father called her with news that came as a bit of a shock.
My dad said, I am a woman. And I said, what? And my dad said, I'm a woman. I'm transitioning. I'm going to become a woman. And I remember being, at first, puzzled, saying, you got to be joking. Are you kidding? What are you talking about? And my dad was adamant. I'm the wrong person. I'm going to become the right person. Don't you see? This is why I've been so angry. And it was really just, it was a lot.
Now I'm here with my dogs.
Zoe Tur now lives in Northern California.
Katie and I were very close. She really looked up to me, and I failed her. No father wants to fail their daughter.
Let me tell you what she says you did when she was younger. She says you get so angry that you'd punch holes in the wall and that you threw things like batteries at Marika. Is that true?
Throwing batteries? Probably, yeah. Punching walls? There were a couple. I was in the news business, and we were under extraordinary pressure. I could be very intimidating, for sure. And if the kids felt I was intimidating, I apologize. I did the best I could.
Katy Tur says they haven't seen each other in 10 years. And while they have different takes on why they're estranged, it's clear there's still love there.
I'm not hiding anymore. And if it takes an act of public humiliation in front of a camera to make Katie feel better and feel vindicated, so be it. I'm happy to do that. I love her that much.
So I am also afraid of heights. You can't get me anywhere near an edge, and I will seize up. But I can lean, I can press myself up against the glass and feel totally fine.
Katy Tur knows that looking down can be both scary and exhilarating, and the same is true of looking back.
So it's understandable and commendable facing your past. Why put it out in the public?
It's a really good story. My parents did amazing things. They went from nothing to something big and important. And who wouldn't want to read that story? I want that story to be down. I want my kids to know this. I want them to know my parents the way that I knew my parents, even if they never end up meeting their grandfather. And part of the story is the violence. If I only wrote the good stuff, it would have been a lie. It's a business where you're not supposed to lie. You're supposed to tell the truth, and this is the truth.
More with Katy Tur coming up in just a few minutes. But up next, A Painter's Painter, a look at the work of artist Joan Mitchell. She may not have quite the fanfare of her abstract expressionist contemporaries, like, say, Jackson Pollock. But as Rita Braver found out, Joan Mitchell left her mark on the art world nonetheless.
Perhaps if I hadn't had to fight, I would have quit. I don't know. I doubt it, though.
Joan Mitchell's work may have been born out of struggle, but there's no question that she was able to prevail, creating paintings now considered 20th century masterpieces.
Her work is strong, muscular, declarative, aggressive. It is everything that abstract expressionism thought that it wanted to be.
And Katie Siegel, who co-curated this show for the Baltimore Museum of Art, says that it is in part an effort to place Mitchell in the pantheon of other abstract expressionists who exploded onto the New York art scene in the 1950s. She was one of several important women artists who exhibited at that time. Yet it seems like it was the men who got all the attention. Why was that?
Well, it's not rocket science to figure out why. It was just plain old sexism.
Still, Joan Mitchell always charted her own course. She was born in 1925 to a well-to-do Chicago family. Her father a doctor, and her mother the editor of a poetry magazine.
She did athletics. She was a champion ice skater. She went to the symphony. She went to the Art Institute of Chicago, and it was a life of culture.
It seems like she developed an early interest in both art and poetry. And when she was 11 years old, her father told her she had to choose one?
Yes.
Is that true?
It is true. And he said, you have to be great at something. You can only do that one thing. And she chose.
Mitchell would never look back. While her early work was figurative, by the time she was 25 and living in New York, she was moving further into abstraction.
And she paints Figure in the City in 1950, and she said, I knew that would be my last figure, and it was.
In 1959, she moved to Paris, where she made increasingly larger works. A decade later, she bought a country estate where the French Impressionist Claude Monet had once painted. How has her work evolved by this time?
I mean, for one thing, that idea that she uses all colors, the full spectrum, has really developed here. And a really amazing use of white that just lights up the painting.
Would she have been okay for me to say, it's gorgeous?
Yes. She was not afraid of beauty, unlike most people in her generation. And as she said, I'm not of the make it ugly school.
Mitchell was described as both charming and cantankerous. Her love life was tumultuous. A heavy drinker and smoker, she suffered from depression. And often traveling between France and the U.S., she said she always felt like an outsider.
In France, I'm an American gestural painter, which is and lyric on top of it, very pejorative. And here I'm Frenchy because I have color and a decorative. Ooh, so you can't win, honey. And on top of it all, I'm a girl, woman, female.
She's a painter's painter.
However Mitchell thought she was seen, artists like Stanley Whitney, 20 years younger, acknowledged her influence. What did you want to learn from her?
The freedom, and I wanted the color, and I wanted the space, the timing of it, the rhythm of it.
And he says that works like Sunflowers show how skilled Mitchell became.
It's magical how much she gets done by just making a mark. She knows so much about painting that she has total freedom to do whatever she wants.
Joan Mitchell never got to see the prices of her work skyrocket. Blueberries sold for $16.6 million in 2018. She died of lung cancer in 1992 at age 67.
Even though she died early, that's almost 5 decades of painting, but also the model of a life lived incredibly intensely. If art was at the center of her life, life is really at the center of her art.
What happened to your parents' business?
In my memory.
We close the show with exclusive excerpts from my interview with Katy Tur. Stay with us.
Suddenly, my parents didn't have
Welcome back. As promised, here's more with Katy Tur. So let's talk about this book. I feel like, in a way, this is a book that you never intended to write.
I didn't intend to write it at the time that I wrote it, and there was a part of me that thought this should never get put down on the page. There was also a part of me that thought, hey, listen, this is a great story, and you're gonna have to get it down at some point. I think it just would have been a lot later than when I did it.
I mean, you said, until this moment, I'd avoided my childhood and talking about my past.
I wasn't ready to confront it. My childhood was complicated. It was a lot of fun. It was really cool, very unique. And when people would ask me about it, it was fun to say, I went in my parents' helicopter to have lunch in Catalina for the day, or I am obsessed with backyard pools because of how I grew up living in a helicopter. But then they ask, well, what do your parents do now? And what happened to the helicopter? And then it gets more complicated, and that's when I start to shut down. So it was easier just to stop talking about it.
But you decided to talk about it.
But in the middle of the pandemic, when I think everybody was wondering what the heck are we doing with our lives, I felt it intensely. I felt very dark. I wondered if journalism was the job that I actually wanted to do, or whether I just kind of fell into it, was forced into it. Whether I was making the world better or worse with the job that I did. I started to worry about the divide and partisanship and not being able to communicate, and whether I was helping or hurting that. And I also got a little bit paranoid, a little bit superstitious that I was turning 38 and Los Angeles News Service, my parents' business, fell apart when my dad was 38. And I started to wonder if this was when it was gonna end for me as well.
Talk about the business that they built. What was Los Angeles News Service?
So when I was really small, some of my earliest memories were going with them in the car to overnight stringer stories, overnight accidents, freeway accidents, seeing the jaws of life being used. They would compile these videos of all the horrible things that they had shot as, I guess, sizzle reels to try and sell tape.
As a kid, watching this, growing up in the midst of this, what was that like?
Tumultuous. We would go out to lunch or to dinner, and you'd learn to eat really fast, because at any moment the scanner would come to life and there would be a story, and you'd have to leave midway through the meal. So I learned to just shovel food into my mouth and be quick about it.
Was everything in your life in those early years about the next story, about getting to the next story?
It all revolved around it. I think some of my first words were smoke showing.
Smoke showing.
Smoke showing.
There's a fire.
Because on the scanner, if it says smoke showing, that's a fire that you probably want to cover. My mom says that I would see sirens and I would say, story, story, story. Everything was about the business. Everything was about chasing the next news story. It felt like that was my other sibling. It was me, my brother, the dog, and Los Angeles News Service.
What happened to your parents' business?
In my memory, around 1998, it all fell apart. And it felt very sudden to me. Suddenly, My parents didn't have a contract at KCBS any longer, which was their main employer. They didn't have a staff any longer because they all quit and went somewhere else. My grandmother died, and she was the business manager. She kept everything together. My dad had a heart attack. My parents were fighting more than they ever were, and they no longer had a reason to go up in the air. And then all of a sudden, they no longer had the ability to go up in the air. They didn't have a helicopter any longer. And it felt like time stopped.
So how old were you when all of this went down?
14.
So what was that like from your perspective?
It felt like the people that I knew were gone. I felt like I had two sets of parents. One before I was 14 and one after I was 14. One where they were cowboys who couldn't be stopped, who had all of the confidence, who knew what they wanted and went out and got it, and they were successful. They embodied success. They were competitive. They beat everybody to anything. You could not stop them. After I was 14, you couldn't get them out of the house to do anything any longer. And as much as I hated growing up, them never being around, they never went to my baseball games or my basketball games and said they'd fly over and say, Katy Tur hit a home run. And that frustrated me. They weren't like the parents at PTA. They weren't doing the bake sale. They missed a lot of my school performances, and that made me sad at the time. Looking back after I was 14, I thought, well, I missed that version, because now you're always around. And I don't feel like I have anyone to look up to anymore.
That's a lot for a 14-year-old.
Feels like they gave up.
I mean, I can only imagine you're trying to process that as you're processing all of the teenage things in your own life that are going on.
I mean, 14 is about the time when boys would have wanted to date me because my dad had a helicopter, my mom had a helicopter, and we could go up in it. And that's when we lost it, which was a real bummer, because that's also the time when I got a whole lot of zits and I could have used some extra help.
I'm Tracy Smith. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you here next time on Here Comes the Sun.